The dog wouldn't eat. David had tossed him turkey, real meat, not scraps. Any stray would have devoured it instantly. But this dog just looked at the food, then looked up at David. He whined and stepped back, turning his head toward the dense woods behind the construction site. Most of the crew had left early. It was Christmas Eve. But David's boss wanted the job finished. The dog had been there since dawn. He'd watched the crew come and go all morning. Now, with most of them gone, his eyes were fixed on David. He didn't bark or beg. He just waited, like he was looking for something or someone. Tony, one of the younger workers, walked by carrying rebar. "You're wasting your lunch on that mutt?" he laughed. "He's probably rabid. Animal control should have grabbed him by now." He didn't even glance at the dog, just kept walking. David stayed where he was. Something about this dog was different. His posture, his focus, the way he moved was controlled and deliberate. "You too good for turkey?" David muttered. The dog barked. Once, loud and commanding, then he turned toward the woods. David stepped closer to the fence. That's when he saw it. The dog wasn't wearing a standard collar. It was a piece of dirty rope, knotted tightly around his neck, and taped to the rope was a small, filthy piece of cardboard. David's hands went cold. He opened the gate. "Come here," he said softly. The dog didn't run. He stood perfectly still, his whole body trembling as David knelt down and reached for the makeshift collar. David peeled back the edge of the tape. The handwriting was shaky, written in smudged black marker. 3 words, "I can't move." Below that, scrawled desperately, "Follow dog." David looked at the dog. His chest tightened. "Show me." The dog didn't need to be told twice. He spun around and bolted into the trees. His phone buzzed. His boss. "Where are you? We're behind schedule." David looked at the woods. Then he silenced his phone and ran. He had no idea what was waiting at the end of those woods. He followed the dog through the brush, his boots catching on roots and thorns tearing at his jacket. The dog moved with precision, weaving through dense undergrowth like he'd memorized every tree. This isn't a stray, David thought. This dog moves like he's been trained. The dog stopped every 50 yards, looking back to make sure David was still coming. Each time, those sharp eyes locked onto him, checking, waiting, then pushing forward. They ran for over a mile. David's lungs burned. He stopped, gasping. "This is insane." But when he looked up, the dog was sitting 40 yards ahead, staring, not leaving without him. David kept running. The sun was dropping. His mind raced. If whoever wrote that note is still alive, they won't be for much longer. After nearly 2 miles, the dog finally slowed. They had reached an old hunting shack, half collapsed and swallowed by overgrowth. The roof sagged dangerously on one side. The dog ran to the door and started scratching frantically, whining in sharp bursts. David knew then. Whoever wrote that note was inside. He walked to the door and pounded on the rotting wood. "Hello," he shouted. "Is anyone in there?" But there was only silence. David kicked the door hard. The rotten wood splintered and gave way. The smell hit him immediately. Rot, human waste, and something sour. David gagged, pulling his shirt over his nose. He stepped through the doorway, boots creaking on the old floorboards. An elderly man lay in the corner on a pile of filthy sleeping bags. His leg was twisted at a bad angle beneath a fallen support beam. Broken, maybe in 2 places. He must have tried to drag himself to the door. He hadn't made it far. His face was gray, his lips blue. He wasn't moving. For a terrible moment, David thought he was too late. The dog rushed past him, licking the man's face desperately. David dropped to his knees and pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck. A pulse. Faint, but there. "Hang on," David said. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "I need an ambulance at North Ridge Trail 2 miles in from the old logging road. There's a man trapped. He's alive, but barely." "Stay on the line," the dispatcher said. "Help is coming." David looked around the shack for the first time. That's when he noticed what surrounded this man. On a rickety shelf near the window were 3 wrapped Christmas presents. The paper was torn in places, revealing a teddy bear, children's books. On the wall, pinned with a rusty nail, was a creased family photograph, a young woman with 2 small children, and on the floor, crumpled beside the man's outstretched hand, was a bus ticket. David picked it up. December 24th. Today, Christmas Eve. He was supposed to be on this bus right now. This man wasn't homeless. He was going somewhere. "God," David whispered. The man was alive. But David didn't know yet why he was out here or what he'd been running from. The ambulance couldn't make it up the ravine. The terrain was too rough. Paramedics had to hike in on foot with a stretcher and equipment. David stayed beside the man, watching his shallow breaths. The dog pressed his body against the man's chest, trying to keep him warm. 30 minutes felt like hours. Twice David pressed his fingers to the man's neck, terrified the pulse had stopped. It hadn't, but it was getting weaker. David couldn't stop thinking about the Christmas presents and the bus ticket. Probably those presents were for kids, a family waiting for him on Christmas. So why had he been living out here alone? When the paramedics finally loaded the old man onto the stretcher, his eyes fluttered open. He looked around wildly, panicked until he saw the dog. "Rex!" the old man wheezed, his voice barely audible. "He's here," David said, gripping the dog's collar. "He saved you. He found me and brought me here." The old man's eyes filled with tears. "I told him to go," he whispered. "I didn't think he'd come back." David looked at the dog. "He came back. He waited by that fence for hours. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't leave, not until someone followed him." The old man broke down. "He's a good soldier," David said quietly. "He completed his mission." Before they left, David took one last look around the shack. He grabbed the Christmas presents from the shelf. He noticed a tag on the teddy bear. The handwriting was shaky but careful. "To Sarah, I'm finally coming home. Love, Dad." Tucked beneath the presents was a sealed envelope. On the front, Sarah Mitchell, 412 Oakwood Drive, Asheville. At the hospital, David waited while doctors stabilized the patient. The doctors wouldn't tell him anything. David paced the lobby, replaying the gift tag in his mind. "I'm finally coming home." He had to make it. He had to. A social worker approached him. "We're trying to identify him," she said. "He had no wallet, no ID." David handed her the envelope. There was an address, Sarah Mitchell, 412 Oakwood Drive, Asheville. The social worker's eyes widened. Sarah Mitchell filed a missing persons report this morning." David felt his stomach drop. "This morning?" The social worker nodded. "Her father was supposed to arrive today. He'd called her 2 days ago, first time in 15 years, to say he was coming. When he didn't answer this morning, she panicked." She looked at David. "She's been calling every hour since." David looked through the glass at the old man hooked up to machines. He didn't change his mind. He was coming home. 30 minutes later, a woman rushed through the hospital doors with 2 children. She was crying before she even reached the front desk. Sarah Mitchell was in her early 40s, her face lined with exhaustion and fear. The kids, a boy about 10 and a girl about 8, clung to her sides, wide-eyed and confused. David stood back as the social worker guided them to the ICU. This wasn't his moment. Through the window, he watched Sarah collapse into the chair beside her father's bed. She took his hand and sobbed. The old man's eyes opened slowly. When he saw her, his face broke. "Sarah," he whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Dad," she choked out, "you came back. That's all that matters. You came back." The little boy stepped forward, staring at Rex, who sat perfectly still beside the bed. The nurses had made an exception. They understood. "Is that your dog?" he asked his grandfather. The old man nodded weakly. "His name is Rex. He's a hero. He saved me." The boy looked at Rex with wide eyes. "Can we keep him?" Sarah let out a tearful laugh through her sobs. "Sweetheart, Rex already has a home with Grandpa." The old man squeezed his daughter's hand. "With all of us." Later, David would learn the full story, and it would break his heart. The old man's name was Elias Carter. He was 72 years old. He'd served in Vietnam in his early 20s and came home broken. PTSD and survivor's guilt consumed him. He couldn't handle crowds, couldn't handle noise, couldn't handle being around the people he loved. 15 years ago, he'd left. It was right after Sarah's mother died. Sarah was 27, pregnant with her first child, and grieving alone. Elias couldn't face it. The funeral, the memories, the way his daughter looked at him and needed him to be strong. So one morning, he disappeared. He vanished into the Appalachian wilderness, convinced his family was better off without him. Sarah never stopped looking. Shelters, police reports, mountain roads, nothing. 9 years after he vanished, a VA outreach worker found him, convinced him to accept help. They gave him Rex, trained as a PTSD service dog, the same breed that had served alongside soldiers in combat zones. The VA said they paired warriors with warriors. Rex didn't just keep Elias alive. He gave him hope. Slowly, over 6 years, the dog helped him heal, helped him believe he could go home. On December 22nd, Elias had been preparing to surprise his daughter and grandchildren. He'd bought the presents in town weeks earlier, wrapped them carefully. He'd written Sarah a letter explaining everything. He'd bought the bus ticket. He was finally ready. But while securing the shack's roof for winter, the beam gave way. It caught his leg and brought him down hard. He heard the bone snap before he felt it. He tried to crawl to the door. The pain was blinding. He made it 3 feet before his body gave out. By morning, the cold had set in. He was freezing and fading. With his last strength, he'd scrawled the note and tied it to Rex's collar. "Go," he'd commanded. "Find help." And Rex had run. 2 miles through the wilderness to the nearest sign of human activity. He found a construction site. He found Tony, who didn't even look twice. Then he found David. And he waited. Not for food, but for the right person. The next morning, Christmas Day, Elias was discharged. David was invited to dinner. He had no family of his own, just an empty apartment and a job site. When he arrived, Sarah's house smelled like pine and roasted turkey. Her kids were tearing through wrapping paper. Elias sat in an armchair by the fireplace. Rex curled at his feet. Sarah welcomed David at the door. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing him home." That night, David sat at a stranger's table and felt like family. Elias held his grandson's hand and felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. Forgiveness. Rex slept by the fire, his mission finally complete. The day after Christmas, David's boss called. "Don't bother coming back," he said. "You walked off a job site. We're done." David hung up. He stared at the phone for a long moment. He thought he'd feel something. Anger, maybe. Panic. But he didn't. Sarah had shared the story with local news. By the next day, it had been picked up by stations across the state. 3 days later, he got another call. It was from the VA, the same outreach program that had found Elias 9 years ago. "We heard what you did," the woman said. "Most people would have called animal control and gone back to work. You didn't." David was quiet. "There are thousands of veterans like Elias out there," she continued, "living alone, convinced no one's looking for them. We find them, but we need people who see what others walk past." David thought about Tony, the way he hadn't even glanced at the dog. "When do I start?" David asked. A month ago, David had nothing. No family, an empty apartment, a job site that didn't need him anymore. Now, he had purpose. And for the first time in years, he had somewhere to belong. All because he followed a dog into the woods. This story is inspired by true accounts of service dogs saving their owners' lives. Thousands of veterans live in isolation, struggling with PTSD and survivor's guilt. Many never make it home. Thank you to everyone who stops, who looks twice, who follows.